مشاهدينا عودة لكم مع كاتارين سورينسن صحفية بالبيروتر بيروتر تنحكي عن موضوع كمان مهم من الارتكلز اللي بتكتبون. Welcome back to M.T.في. It's so great to see you every time, every Monday. And the question or the article question, the big question, can Big Tobacco explain big tech? So we saw a shift. And this is a huge shift, and it amazes me all the time. And I will tell you why later.
Perfect. Yes. So first of all, thank you for having me. Always such a pleasure. And as you mentioned, the article is loosely about kind of the similarities between the big tobacco industry and the big tech industry. And by big tech, we mean like the major social media and AI companies such as like Meta, Microsoft, Google, etc. And what kind of lessons that we learned from regulating the tobacco industry could or could not potentially be applied to regulating the technology, AI, social media space.
Okay, but how this is related to electric cigarettes?
Okay, yeah, so e-cigarettes is an interesting component because the big tobacco regulation came during the late 20th century when we were dealing, 20th century, when we were dealing mainly with your kind of traditional cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes. So you had these tobacco companies, operating a huge space kind of across the world. I mean, think of even like every movie from the 1950s or 1960s, the protagonist is smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
In the
doctors
doctors were smoking. Everyone,
yeah.
It was ubiquitous.
Best marketing for
Exactly. So what was really interesting is particularly in the U.S., but in Europe as well, there was an active campaign against the tobacco industry to the point that now the consumption of typical tobacco cigarettes are way lower. Like my generation grew up and none of my friends smoked, and it kind of lost its Hollywood charm.
The electric one, no?
So it's now the electric cigarettes are proposing to be
for it
yes,
now.
Exactly, and
especially
that's
in Lebanon actually. Yeah.
That was something I came across IQOS for the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. When my mom visited, actually, she'd never seen it before and had to have a friend explain what it was. But it does offer really interesting lessons, about when you have this really dominant industry, what are effective ways to regulate it, right? And how can you shift consumer habits? Because with social media, like a cigarette, social media is addictive. AI,
exactly.
like cigarettes, are also addictive, and also it's a lot of young people using social media, just like there were a lot of teenagers smoking cigarettes, So you have a lot of parallels between the two. So there's just been a lot of talk about, what can we learn from how we safely regulated tobacco and how we can apply it to social media and AI.
But actually, this is kind of smart, how doing this comparison between what is been there for maybe 100 years and now what is being in the market, newly in the market. We're talking about artificial intelligence. Yes. So is it a way to learn from the big tobacco to apply it to big tech?
Yes, precisely. It's a way to kind of take the lessons of what did and didn't work with big tobacco and then apply it to our era of social media and AI. So one really interesting similarity between the two is you'll find information imbalances where the companies know a lot more about the product than the consumers or the governments did. So,
especially the negative
exactly.
Effects.
So during the 20th century, you had big tobacco lobby extensively to prevent further regulation. They did a whole campaign showing that actually smoking's good for you, and they would feature doctors and say, oh, look, smoking is why I lived to 90 years old, et cetera. So there was a very active effort by these companies to portray cigarettes and smoking as something that wasn't detrimental to, the population, and that was actually a benefit. So you saw the same thing happening with social media. So a lot of times the companies have information about the harms of social media that they're not disclosing to the public. And oftentimes it's being disclosed through leaked documents, which is really interesting. So actually in 2021, a Facebook whistleblower ended up testifying before Congress in the US and released thousands of internal documents showing that Facebook did tests that showed how harmful Instagram was to young users, and they didn't disclose it. They did their own research, and they didn't disclose it. So we took this whistleblower coming in and saying, hey, this is a problem, we need to address it.
That's putting aside all the data breaches and everything related to social media. Plus, there's a kind of peer pressure that happens here, whether when we talk about social media and AI, or when we talk about cigarettes and smoking.
100%, 100%.
And there's a lot of restrictions
Yeah.
in the tobacco company, but there is none maybe now to artificial intelligence. Here I have a huge question. I think it will explain a lot to my questions. It was very progressive going from tobacco companies to go to reach electronic cigarette.
Right.
Artificial intelligence is way faster, way wild. How we can project in 5 years where we are going and how
and
we
we're
can
addicted
manipulate
without
this.
knowing that we're
Totally.
addicted.
Yep, so you raise a really good point about kind of the difficulties of regulating AI, where it's moving so fast that if you put regulations in place today, it could be obsolete in a year or 2 years, you know, rather than a cigarette. Okay, yes, it can transform into an e-cigarette, but you're dealing with the same product.
It's in 100 years. It took time,
yeah, and
a lot
it
of
took time. It took time, and it didn't change that drastically. You know, it's a cigarette in a new form. I mean, think of the AI.
We don't know where it's going.
Exactly, and the
know where we are
advancements.
going with it.
Exactly. So the questions are, you know, how can you regulate something that you don't know what form it'll end up with?
Yeah.
But then there's also a danger in not doing anything and waiting for AI to become so dangerous that by the time any regulation is put in place, it's too late. So you have to, people talk about adaptive regulation, where you like put in some initial safeguards, you know, and you demand a certain level of transparency, accountability, incident reporting, like when something goes wrong with social media or AI companies being forced to disclose what happened.
And holding them responsible.
Holding them responsible, exactly. But then with the understanding that, okay, the technology is going to evolve, AI will evolve. There's also a really, you know, great use case of AI. So this is actually a key difference between tobacco or big tech and big tobacco.
Unlike
exactly.
smoking.
So for this article, I actually interviewed this one AI ethicist, and she made the point that fossil fuels could actually be a better comparison, because fossil fuels, like AI, has a lot of benefits, right? Coal, oil, gas basically powers the modern economy, and industrialization wouldn't have happened if it weren't for fossil fuels, but it came with climate change and pollution. Think of AI. AI can lead to great advancements in education, scientific research, productivity, but also comes with these dangers. So it's like, it's a double-edged sword, and you don't want to go too far in one direction.
Yeah, but we're analyzing this, like if AI has maybe more dangerous features than tobacco.
It does.
Because it could be out of control.
Because it's unpredictable. It's unpredictable. And it is an addictive substance, which is a weird, I think, mentality to wrap your head around. You know, we can think of smoking as addictive, or drinking as addictive, or drugs as addictive. That's a, you know, an association we can make. But technology is also addictive, and particularly for youth, you know, and young children. They're very malleable. And you mentioned, you know, the social pressures of social media. Oh, my friends are doing it. Why?
The constant comparisons also. Plus, you mentioned in your article aviation. Like, what about this comparison?
Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. The aviation point was to show, you know, here was kind of a successful industry regulation where aviation came along, and there are dangers posed with flight travel, but the response wasn't to ban planes, right? That wasn't the response governments took. It was like, okay, we understand this is a new industry that requires regulation, but also has a great, you know, benefit to society. So it was kind of a step-by-step regulation where planes had to be tested, you know, operators were held responsible if an accident occurred. There were kind of a constant checking in on the safety parameters of these aviation industries. And obviously now we have flight travel, which is amazing, and a very high level of safety standards that these companies are, you know, beholden to.
Exactly. You mentioned earlier, like, holding these companies responsible. How important today is independent investigation and not relying specifically on these companies and AI companies to actually talk about the harm that they are causing, like themselves.
Yes, it's very important, because if a lesson from big tobacco was, you know, companies, they're in a capitalist economy, companies are incentivized by profit. And in that, you know, framework, they're not going to disclose that their products are harmful voluntarily. So you have to kind of push their hand, compel them to expose it, which is why it's, you know, accountability and transparency will be really, really big with these AI safety regulations.
Maybe the similarities, if we go to tobacco back, It's people that claim that they are sick from different problems issued by tobacco. If you go to artificial intelligence, it could have the same harm, but no claims yet. If you go to aviation, what maybe brought solution is the claims of the people that had accidents in the aviation sector, which is you open also a door for an addiction.
Yep.
So
yeah, precisely.
is it and one thing is very obvious, they go from cigarette to electronic cigarette to diminish maybe the problems, but they brought a new generation that never smoked before, but they do electronic
Just
cigarettes.
like they use AI to make their
It's very
life
mental.
easier, but they're making it actually harder for them to live day to day without having to necessarily use it.
Right, because you form a dependency.
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
the language of addiction, the language of dependency. And it's really interesting also to see, though, how there was this push against tobacco, particularly in the US. I mean, think of cigarette packs that now say smoking kills.
Yeah.
Or in Arabic, التدخين يقتل, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that was...
It's on the
Because
on
by
the
law, they
on the
forced it. Yeah,
but
they
that
should
was-
force it the same way for
Exactly.
the AI.
So that was a step that government took, that governments took to say, okay, you need to put this on your cigarette packet. So now every time you take out a cigarette packing, you might not care, but it does say it on the packaging, and it's enough to maybe make you pause. And taxation was also really, really big.
I think
So-
that's a more efficient way.
Yes, taxation was huge because it made smoking an expensive habit to do.
Yeah.
So where I'm from, New York, if you buy a 20-pack of cigarettes, there's federal taxes, state taxes, city taxes, so that an average pack of cigarettes is $13 to $18.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that is a very expensive habit to pursue. And that really kind of pushed people away from, just going through packs day by
and then
day.
you cannot promote, you cannot sponsor teams by having it. So
Precisely.
one of the
Exactly.
Precisely.
كاتارين سورينسن, thank you so much. صحفية بالبيروتر, مشاهدينا كان بيك توباكو explained big tech. Thank you so much for your article. وقفة وبنرجع لكم مشاهدينا.